Hey guys, it's Duckville here. I've got a really quick balance patch. Well, not a balance patch. It's like a possible changes that we're going to make to the balance of StarCraft 2. What we're going to do is we're going to have a really quick look through. As I don't want to go too long as I normally kind of do, as you guys will know. But we're going to have a quick look at some of these changes here. Well, we'll talk just quickly about what they are, what they will possibly do. And whether they'll be good or bad, we'll give it the thumbs up or the thumbs down. From my perspective, now keep in mind I am not a pro gamer, I'm just a caster, so there are going to be things that I might miss or I might not think about straight away, but for anyone who wants to make some comments, please feel free to post in the comments below this video here, and I'd be happy to hear your feedback on my thoughts, or of course on the balance patch, the possible changes themselves. So what we'll do is we will have a quick look over here, just on the old Google Chrome. First change is going to be changing photon overcharge duration from 60 seconds to 40 seconds. I'm not sure how I feel about this one. This is a bit weird. Now, part of the problem is that, as we can see right up the top here from Blizzard, is feedback on Protoss strength. And of course, as we all know, a lot of, particularly the Terran players, are having some trouble in TvP. Now, this particular change is really weird because it's not, from my perspective, from someone who watches a lot of games and casts a lot of games, of course, it's not necessarily the duration of photon overcharge that's an issue. It's just the fact that it gives the Protoss the freedom to cut corners right at the start of the game. You can see certain builds, such as one that Minigun does every now and then, the Colossus Phoenix based play, which sits on one gate and like 3 units or something like that for the first 8 minutes of the game. It's incredible. So photon overcharge is just it's something that allows a Protoss to really cut corners. Of course, it also allows them to deflect drops quite easily. Really cuts down on the power of Terran harassment, particularly during the early and mid game, where you just can't drop as much because of certainly partly to do with the maps, just the way that some maps have very small main bases, and the photon overcharge can cover almost the entire base. It's just an issue that it just allows a Protoss to be able to sit there and say, it's all good, I'm going to cut corners, I'm going to get my tech out, I'm going to get my economy up quite nicely, and then still be protected against early sorts of attacks. So you see quite a lot in TvP. Terran players will move out, sometimes earlier, sometimes later, but normally around the 6 to 7 minute mark, with a small group of Marines and Marauders that will head out there, and what they want to do is try and bait out a photon overcharge on the natural nexus. Now, the reason for this is because when you bait out that photon overcharge, it means that the mothership core does not have 200 energy later on for your sort of 10.5 minute, 11, 12 minute push that a Terran normally does with their +1 weapons, their stim, all this kind of cool stuff done. So what you want to do is you want to bait out that photon overcharge, head in towards the main with a drop or something like that, or maybe do it the other way and drop inside the natural and sort of push weirdly. But the point is that it's not really reliant on people having timings where a Terran is going to say, all right, cool, set your clocks, boys, we've got, the photon overcharge is down, we're going to wait 60 seconds and we're going to go in again. It's more so a Terran is going to snipe what they can, then run away, or some people will be more daring, try and snipe a nexus, then run away. It's never something of, we'll sit here and just wait a minute, all right, go get a coffee or something, it's all good. So I think this particular change is really weird. As a plane goes, I don't know if you guys can hear that, whatever. So it's rarely something like a Terran just charging in and just sitting there and having a battle for 60 seconds, like a Pokemon fight or something like that. It's about the fact that it gives them such space. It creates space, as we say in Dota sometimes, where a Protoss can cut corners and get their tech out and this kind of thing. So the question you've got to ask is, perhaps a change here could be to lower the damage on the photon overcharge. Like, I mean, it does, 20 damage? Maybe lower it to 15 or something like that. Who knows? That could certainly help out a little bit. But I personally feel like, from a Terran perspective, the duration change is not going to do too much. For PvZ, it could do a little bit. Sometimes run-bys can do a little bit of damage. Of course, big doom drops and that kind of stuff can do some damage. And if the photon overcharge is only lasting for 40 seconds, then it's not necessarily going to do as much damage. So It's not going to protect you as well. Also, it could be a little bit worrisome for Protoss players if they're not scouting properly and don't find a muta switch or something like that. If you only have 40 seconds to protect the base, it's not necessarily as much to be able to build up a Phoenix force to try and counter mutas or get some Templar out and get their energy done or something like that. So could have a little bit of an effect there, but not a huge one, I don't think. PvP is where the place where Photon Overcharge is going to have a massive change, of course, with early game Protoss versus Protoss being basically a let's not fight unless it's based on oracles kind of thing or DTs or something like that. You're never really going to have people doing these builds where you go one, maybe 1.5 base, which is what I like to call it when people have just started getting their natural up and running. You don't have these timings where people just try and bust through because a Protoss player is always going to have a Photon Overcharge available. So this is certainly going to help here. It reduces the amount of space, particularly during the early game where a Protoss player can sit there and cut corners, which is what we were talking about before. So this could have a really interesting effect here. The one question I have, which is something you may want to answer yourself in the comments below, is does it expose early game one base builds, such as things that we used to see a long time ago based on Immortals or possibly even Void Rays, given that they're a little bit more useful now? That's one thing that I would question as to this particular change. So the next one that we'll have a quick look at here is the Roach burrow speed. Movement increased to 2.25. Now they didn't list it here, I don't know why, but it's currently 2. So this isn't exactly the biggest of changes, and I'm not really sure what it's intended to do. The part of the reasoning here that we've got from Blizzard is that the recent change they made before, increasing it from 1.7 or something like that to 2, it hasn't done much. It didn't do much. Literally, they've said it right there. We rarely see any burrow Roach games, blah, blah, blah. We'd like to bump this up. Blizzard seem to be completely forgetting. This upgrade costs 150 for burrowed movement. You've got the speed upgrade that you have to add in as well for Roaches, which is mandatory if you're going to do something with Roaches. No one ever says, let's do a slow Roach attack. Yeah, you may see them at the start, like a 7 Roach rush or something like that we used to see quite a lot, but rarely ever is someone going to kill someone with that kind of stuff unless you're massively caught out of position or it's a low level game, that kind of stuff. So you've also got to add in the burrow cost as well. So all this stuff costs gas, costs a lot of gas, it costs a lot of time as well, and Roaches really depreciate over time when it comes to their usefulness. Of course, if you're against a Terran player, if they scan you at any time and they see there's a couple of extra Roaches out, or they see the Roach den is the Roach Warren is doing its little pulsating dance, they're gonna say, oh, something's going on with Roaches here. I better get a tank or two. I better get a Banshee or something like that. Maybe some Widow Mines even. And they're going to be prepared for that kind of stuff. So the time that it takes for these particular upgrades to come out, the gas that it costs is where the issue is. It's not necessarily that people say, whoa, the Jaws strat, which is my name for it, by the way, the Jaws strat is bad. Let's just never use that because they're not fast enough. They need to be like Zerglings underground. It's not necessarily to do with that. It's to do with the fact that it takes so much time, takes so much gas to get this done. So that's where I would like to see Blizzard sort of having a quick look at this particular thing to maybe try and change it. But this particular change, I don't think is going to go in as such, because it's really not going to make a difference. Do you really ever hear Terran player? Now this is slightly different. It's a different situation. But when do Terran players since the patch say, "Oh my god"? The siege tank attack speed buff of 0.2 of a second, which is almost exactly the same, has really changed my life, and I'm a changed Terran player now. No one ever says that. That's the same kind of speed change that we've got here. It's a tiny bit, which is not really a huge amount. Change number 3, which has been the most interesting one that has been talked about here, is the next step for Terran Mech. Blizzard still on their campaign to make Mech useful, not realizing that it's kind of their own fault that Mech isn't useful in TvP. We believe we can push Mech usage more as well. Some options we're looking at here are higher armor damage for siege tanks, easier access to EMP when going Mech, such as building the energy upgrade into the unit, that's the Mobius reactor, or buffing Mech air. These are their 3 ideas. So let's just quickly break them down and have a quick think about what these kind of things could do. Higher armor damage for siege tanks, not a good idea. This is the one that I'm least favorite of. I like the least. Whatever. English. I need more coffee. This one hurts TVZ a lot. Mech is a very very strong, viable build. I think in TVZ, it's just the fact that people are still sticking with what they know. Some in regards to Biomind, and of course, people are still some people like aggressive styles, and that's cool. That's all good. Whereas with Mech, you're much more kept back. You're much more turtly, very tactical, position-based play. So Mech is already something that is very strong in the TVZ matchup. If you added extra damage for siege tanks, Roaches are going to be useless. Sometimes in TVZ, in ZVT Mech, the Zerg player can switch over to Ultras and sometimes catch out a Terran player who is either screwing about doing the build wrong, or maybe they're switching into BCs and they don't have as many tanks. If you buff up the siege tank damage, that is completely dead. If you you count that alongside the fact that Zerg Air in ZVT against Mech is almost impossible. You can't mute it, you can't corrupt it, you can't Broodlord because they don't do anything at all now. So, what would you ever do? And I mean, this is a huge problem that Zerg players are having dealing with Mech, and why it's starting to slowly come about a lot more than what it was before, is that it is very hard to deal with. TVP. This is a really weird one, because if they're trying to cater this to TVP, I don't know what the logic is behind it. Armored units such as the Stalkers shouldn't be used after about 15-20 minutes in a PvT. If the Terran is going Mech and the Protoss knows that's happening, you should not be making Stalkers. Go and see my Protoss versus Mech video if you're not sure why. You should not be getting Colossi. Realistically, they're not that useful in PvT Mech. And then your other unit, the Immortal, what? It's already got hardened shields. What do you mean? I don't know. It's really weird. And then for TVT, of course, it's gonna annoy Bioterrans. I wasn't really able to think about this one too much. I asked a couple of players just before I made this video on what they thought about it, but I think it really annoys Terran Bio just because of the fact that your Marauders are going to get smashed apart quite a lot. So I don't know. That's a really weird one. I'm not sure how that would go. But I'm not a massive expert on TVT. I don't get to see it that often. Next one, easier access to EMP when going Mech, such as building the Mobius reactor into the unit. This is a more intriguing one, because this allows a Mech and even a Bioterran. Let's keep that in mind, because Ghost can be used quite a lot in late game Bio TVP. It saves you a little bit of resources, saves you a little bit of time as well, lets you start cranking out those ghosts straight away instead of trying to time it out so that your Mobius reactor hits just before the ghosts start coming out. I don't think it's a massive sort of change, but I think this is the direction where we need to go. It's not necessarily relating to laying on the deeps, laying on the massive damage that the tanks and the Thors and blah 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 all do. It's about utilizing the support units. For Zerg, they have their Vipers and Infestors that can be used as support units. For the Protoss, they've got their, your Oracles, Templar, all these kinds of things that are good support units. For Mech, it's just about positioning, it's just about laying in the big damage, and of course, if you're playing Mech properly, it's a lot about using Ghosts and their EMP, and of course, Ravens. So I think that particular direction is a good way to go. I'm not sure, though, if that's the correct answer for it, but we'll see. And the other option, buffing Mech Air, this is quite laughable, because as any Zerg player will know, once you get to late game, TVZ and the Terran is going Mech, or even if they're going Bio and then starting to switch into Battlecruiser Raven, you've basically lost the game. There's almost no way to win that back. So buffing Mech Air is a terrible idea as well. Not as much as the Siege Tank terrible idea, though. So the couple of ideas that I had a little while ago, I thought that Lockdown would be a cool idea to add in, but we're not going to get that because that's a silly idea as well. The other ideas include giving Siege Tanks bonus to shields. This is really weird. Some people have suggested giving tanks bonus to shields, and then you're like, well, when we started StarCraft 2, this whole shindig like 3 years ago, Immortals were introduced as the counter to tanks because they can kill them off because they've got hardened shields. We're then going to revert back and make tanks do bonus to shield? What is this? I don't really understand this. So I personally wouldn't say let's give tanks a bonus to shields. What I would say maybe is a bonus to mech. Not necessarily mechanical units, sorry, just to clarify. Not a huge one. We don't want Warhounds coming back and annihilating everything in TVT and TVP. But I don't know. It's something that could be it could help out a little bit. Doesn't affect TVZ at all, which as we said is already very strong to use Mech. Helps out in TVP a bit, because obviously a lot of the units are mechanical. Doesn't affect TVT a huge amount, because it means that just TVT tank battles and that kind of stuff are going to be affected. But I don't know. Post what you think in the comments about all of these changes that Blizzard have been discussing here in this post, and also the ones that, the questions that I've posted. Of course, does PvP get exposed a little bit in the early game if you change Photon Overcharge? Does the Roach change actually mean anything? And of course, you know, maybe we could give tanks plus the mech mechanical units or something else. Post your thoughts. I would love to hear your comments. If I've said something that was really stupid or wrong or something like that, please post and let me know. I'm happy to hear some constructive criticism. Yeah, hopefully we've got a new interesting season coming up here in the StarCraft 2 world. Make sure you jump on and subscribe to the channel here. Have a look on twitch.tv/duckville as well, where I do a lot of streaming, and I will see you all next time. Here. As you can see, 47 damage to bio units and then the 34 damage against other standard targets. His storms have also been wonderful, just spreading them out across the battlefield, doing really, really nicely there. And for minigun, he's been sticking with a much more